I didn't raise my voice when her tires cut across my lawn again. I just checked the time, 6:12 a.m., exactly like every other morning, and smiled because this time, I was ready. The sound hit first, that dry, brittle crunch of fresh sod giving up under rubber, a sound you don't forget once you've spent 3 straight weekends laying every square foot by hand. The smell followed right after, warm dirt, torn grass, and that faint chemical hint from the sprinkler line she'd clipped 2 days ago like it was nothing. I stood at the edge of my driveway, coffee cooling in my hand, watching the faint curve of tire marks carve through what used to be a clean, straight lawn, and I didn't move to stop her. Not this time. Not anymore. My name's Ethan Cole. I'm 38, electrician by trade, the kind of guy who measures twice, cuts once, and doesn't like repeating mistakes, especially other people's. I bought this place 8 months ago after my divorce finalized, a modest single story on a quiet cul-de-sac just outside Plano, Texas. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. First thing I did was rip out the dead patchy grass and start over. New soil, fresh Bermuda sod, irrigation lines mapped out down to the inch. It wasn't just a lawn, it was the first thing in a long time that felt under my control. Then came Brenda Whitmore, HOA president. White Lexus SUV. The kind of smile that looks polite until you realize it never reaches the eyes. First time she drove across my yard, she waved like it was neighborly. Said it was just a shortcut to shave off, about 30 seconds from the loop. Second time, she didn't wave. Third time, she didn't even look. By the end of week 1, there was a visible path, 2 pale tracks cutting diagonally from curb to curb like my lawn had been downgraded to a public access road. I tried the polite route, walked over, explained the damage, even offered to show her the property line markers. She nodded, smiled, said she understood. Next morning, 6:12 a.m., same tires, same path. Then came the letter. HOA violation notice. Lawn maintenance inconsistency. I remember holding that paper, feeling the thickness of it, the official letterhead, the quiet arrogance baked into every word. She was driving over my property and finding me for how it looked after. That's when something shifted. I stopped arguing, stopped knocking on her door, stopped reacting at all. Instead, I started paying attention. The exact angle of entry. The speed, about 15 miles per hour. The way her front right tire always hit the same soft spot near the sprinkler junction. Every morning, same time, same path, same pressure. People like Brenda, they don't change patterns. They double down on them. And that's the thing about patterns. Once you understand them, you don't have to stop them. You just have to decide exactly when they matter. I started documenting everything the next morning, not out of anger, but out of habit. When you work with electricity, you learn real quick that guessing gets you burned, but measurements keep you alive. So I treated her tires like a current I could not see, but could track. At exactly 6:12 a.m., right on schedule, that low hum of her Lexus rolled into the cul-de-sac, smooth and confident, like she owned every inch of pavement and anything connected to it. I stood behind the blinds with my phone in hand, recording, watching the front right tire dip just slightly as it crossed the edge of my property line, compressing the soil right where the sprinkler junction sat about 4 inches below the surface. The same spot. Every single time. I replayed the footage later that night, frame by frame, the glow of the screen lighting up my living room while the rest of the house stayed quiet. You could see it clearly if you knew what to look for. The angle of entry, about 30 degrees off the curb. The speed steady, no hesitation, no adjustment, like she had done it so many times her body did it automatically. That is when I realized something important. This was not carelessness. This was routine. And routines are predictable. Over the next week, I mapped it out like a job site. Measured the distance from the curb to the first tire mark, just under 11 feet. Measured the depth of the ruts, about 1.5 inches in the softest section. I even checked the soil compaction with a simple probe, confirming what I already suspected. That patch was weaker now, more vulnerable, the perfect trigger point if you knew how to use it. Meanwhile, Brenda kept escalating in her own way. Another notice showed up on my door, this one citing irregular lawn grading and potential drainage issues. I could still smell her perfume on the paper, something sharp and expensive that did not quite hide the undertone of control. She was building a paper trail, positioning herself like she always did, making it look official, making it look justified. I did not respond. Instead, I installed 2 more cameras, low profile, one angled at ground level and another tucked into the corner of the mailbox, both capturing that same diagonal line across my yard. At night, I walked the path myself, boots pressing into the damaged grass, feeling the slight give under my weight, the cool air carrying the faint scent of damp soil and plastic from the exposed irrigation line. I knelt down at the junction box and brushed away a thin layer of dirt, exposing the valve assembly I had installed months ago. Solid, reliable, built to code. It was designed to handle pressure, to control flow, to respond when triggered. I ran my fingers along the pipe, thinking, calculating, not rushing. Because this was not about stopping her. It was about letting her finish what she had started, exactly the way she always did. Same time, same speed, same path. The only difference would be what happened when she got there. I spent the next 2 nights in the garage with the lights off and the door cracked just enough to let the cool air in, the faint hum of the neighborhood settling into silence around me while I worked through the plan piece by piece. There is a certain calm that comes with building something precise, the kind that replaces frustration with focus, and by the time the clock rolled past midnight, I was not thinking about Brenda anymore. I was thinking about pressure, timing, and flow. The sprinkler system ran on a standard residential setup, nothing fancy, but I had installed it myself, which meant I knew every valve, every line, every weak point, and every strength. The junction she kept driving over was not just a connection point. It was the control node for that entire section of the yard, a place where pressure could be redirected if triggered at the right moment. I replaced the damaged segment first, clean cuts, new fittings, everything sealed tight and tested twice, the faint scent of PVC cement lingering in the air. As it dried, then I added something extra, something completely within code, completely legal, but configured in a way that depended on one thing only, consistent external force at a specific location. I calibrated it carefully, adjusting the sensitivity so it would not react to footsteps or normal lawn use. Only something heavier, something like a 2-ton vehicle applying pressure at speed. Every adjustment came with a test, a slow press with a weighted plate, then a reset, then another test, until the response was exactly where I needed it to be. Not too early, not too late. Precise. By the time I finished, my hands were covered in fine dirt and the faint metallic smell of tools, and the yard looked untouched, smooth, even, as if nothing had changed except the quiet tension sitting just beneath the surface. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, the air still cool, the sky just starting to lighten at the edges. I made coffee out of habit but barely tasted it, my attention already outside, focused on the stretch of lawn that had become more predictable than any clock I owned. 6:11 a.m. The neighborhood was still. No engines, no footsteps, just the faint hiss of a distant sprinkler down the block. 6:12 a.m. right on cue. The low purr of that Lexus engine rolled in again, smooth and unbothered, like nothing in the world had ever challenged it. I stepped onto the porch this time, not hiding, just standing there with the mug in my hand, watching her approach. She did not slow down, did not even glance at me. Her eyes stayed forward, confident, practiced. The front tire crossed the curb line, dipped into the grass, and aligned perfectly with the path she had carved over the past 2 weeks. For a split second, everything felt suspended, like the moment before a breaker flips, when you know exactly what is about to happen, but you let it happen anyway. The tire rolled forward, compressing the soil, hitting that same exact point I had measured over and over again. And then, there was a sharp click beneath the surface, almost too quiet to notice unless you were listening for it, followed by a sudden hiss as the system responded exactly the way it was designed to. I did not move. I did not speak. I just watched calm and steady as the routine she had built for herself finally met something that did not bend. The response was instant and mechanical, like the system had been waiting for that exact moment all along. A sharp hiss rising from beneath the lawn as a high-pressure jet of water surged upward through the reinforced nozzle I had embedded just below the surface. Not violent, not chaotic, just controlled force directed straight into the exact space her front tire occupied, and the effect was immediate. The smooth hum of her engine breaking into a startled rev as the tire lost traction on the now saturated soil, the crisp edge of her confident shortcut dissolving into a slick patch of mud in less than a second. The front end of her Lexus dipped slightly, not enough to cause damage, but enough to disrupt that perfect routine she had relied on. And for the first time since this whole thing started, she reacted. I could see it through the windshield, the sudden tightening of her grip on the wheel, the hesitation, the confusion, like her brain was trying to process something that did not fit the pattern she had built in her head. The water continued for exactly 3 seconds, no more, no less, then cut off clean, leaving behind a dark, wet imprint where her tire had pressed down. The soil loosened just enough to create resistance without crossing any line. She hit the brakes harder than she needed to, the car coming to a stop right in the middle of my yard, engine idling, the faint ticking sound of heat meeting moisture rising into the quiet morning air. For a moment, nothing moved. Then her door swung open. The smell of damp earth mixed with that same sharp perfume as she stepped out, heels sinking slightly into the softened ground. Her expression caught somewhere between irritation and disbelief. She looked down first, at the tire, then at the wet patch, then up at me standing on the porch like I had been there the entire time, which I had. "What did you do to my car?" she demanded, her voice tight, controlled, but carrying that edge she usually reserved for HOA meetings and violation notices. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to settle the moment. "Nothing," I said evenly, setting the mug down on the railing. "That is a standard irrigation response system, completely within code." Her eyes narrowed, scanning the yard like she was trying to find something she could point to, something she could label as wrong, but all she saw was grass, damp soil, and a perfectly ordinary-looking sprinkler head sitting flush with the surface. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, taking a careful step back toward the curb, her heel making a soft suction sound as it pulled free from the mud. "You cannot just set traps." I shook my head once, calm, precise. "It is not a trap. It is a system designed to activate under specific conditions. The same conditions your vehicle keeps creating on private property." The words hung there, simple, factual, impossible to twist without exposing the truth she had been avoiding. She glanced around the cul-de-sac, maybe expecting someone to back her up, but the neighborhood was still, curtains closed, doors shut, the only sound the faint drip of water settling back into the ground. I could see the shift happen in her posture, that moment when confidence cracks just enough to let reality in. She was not in control here. Not of the space, not of the situation, not of the outcome. And the part that mattered most? I had not raised my voice, had not blocked her, had not touched her car. I had simply let her routine run into something that did not move. She did not leave right away, and that told me everything I needed to know. Brenda Whitmore was not the kind of person who backed down quietly, not in front of an audience, even if that audience was just a row of silent houses and drawn curtains. She stood there beside her car, arms crossed now, the morning light catching the tight line of her jaw as she recalculated, trying to turn something she did not understand into something she could control. The engine of her Lexus hummed steadily behind her, a soft mechanical purr that felt out of place against the damp, dark patch of lawn beneath it. "You are interfering with community access," she said finally, shifting her tone into that official cadence I had heard in every notice she had ever sent me. "This could be considered obstruction." I let out a small breath, not quite a laugh, more like air escaping. A system that had already balanced itself. "There is no community access across my property," I replied, keeping my voice level, steady, the same way I would explain a wiring diagram to a client who thought they knew better. "And there is no obstruction. The system activates only when pressure is applied in that exact spot." Her eyes flicked down again, then back up, searching for an angle, a loophole, something she could grab onto and reshape into authority. But the problem with facts is that they do not bend just because someone wants them to. "I will have this reviewed," she said sharply. "The board will not tolerate this kind of behavior." I nodded once. That sounds like a good idea. The words landed flat, neutral, giving her nothing to push against, and that seemed to irritate her more than any argument could have. She turned back toward her car, movements tighter now, less controlled, and eased it forward slowly this time, carefully guiding the tires back onto the pavement where they should have been all along. The moment the weight lifted off the lawn, the ground settled back into place, quiet, still, as if nothing had happened except the end of a pattern. I watched her drive away without looking back, the white SUV disappearing around the curve of the cul-de-sac, and for the first time in weeks, there were no fresh tracks cutting across the grass. Just a clean line, unbroken. But I knew better than to assume it was over. People like Brenda do not stop. They escalate. And sure enough, the response came faster than I expected. By late afternoon, there was a notice taped to my front door, thicker than the others, stamped with urgency, the paper still warm from whatever printer had pushed it out in a hurry. I peeled it off and unfolded it slowly, the faint smell of ink mixing with the lingering scent of fresh-cut grass from earlier that day. Emergency HOA review. It read across the top in bold letters, followed by a list of alleged violations that sounded more like guesses than facts. Unauthorized modifications. Potential safety hazards. Disruption of community standards. I stood there on the porch, the paper in my hands, the quiet hum of the neighborhood settling in around me as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lawn that now looked exactly the way it was supposed to. Even, controlled, mine. I folded the notice once, clean and precise, and slipped it into my back pocket without a second thought. Because everything in that document was based on one assumption, that I had done something wrong. And that was the one thing I had made absolutely sure of before I ever touched a single valve. I had not broken a rule. I had not crossed a line. I had simply defined one, in a way that could not be ignored. The meeting notice was not a surprise, but the timing was, less than 24 hours after that morning, which meant she had not slept on it, had not cooled down, she had reacted, and reaction leaves gaps. The HOA clubhouse sat at the end of the subdivision, a beige building with clean lines and the faint smell of chlorine drifting from the community pool behind it, the kind of place designed to look neutral but always felt like a courtroom when Brenda was inside. I arrived 5 minutes early, not out of respect, but because I do not like walking into a room where other people have already decided the narrative. The door opened with a soft click, and the low murmur of voices stopped the second I stepped in. 4 board members sat around the long table, papers spread out in front of them, neat stacks, highlighted sections, the illusion of preparation. Brenda stood at the head, not sitting, never sitting when she wanted control, her posture straight, her expression already set. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice carrying just enough to fill the room without raising it. "Thank you for attending on such short notice." I nodded once and took a seat without asking, the chair scraping lightly against the tile floor, a small sound that seemed louder than it should have been. The air inside was cooler than outside, conditioned, controlled, but there was still a faint tension in it, like static before a circuit closes. "We have received multiple concerns regarding unauthorized modifications to your property," she continued, sliding a folder across the table toward me. "Specifically, a system that may pose a risk to vehicles and potentially violate community guidelines." I opened the folder slowly, not because I needed to read it, but because timing matters, even in something as simple as turning a page. Inside were printed photos, screenshots pulled from somewhere, likely one of the cameras she did not realize I had also been recording from my side. A still image of her car on my lawn. A close-up of the damp soil. A shot of the sprinkler head. Carefully selected, but incomplete. "Do you acknowledge installing this system?" she asked. I looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "I acknowledge installing a standard irrigation control system that complies with city code and manufacturer specifications." One of the board members shifted in his chair, flipping through his own copy of the documents, uncertainty creeping into the edges of his expression. Brenda did not miss a beat. "And do you acknowledge that this system activated in a way that interfered with a vehicle?" There it was, the framing, the attempt to define the event before I could. I leaned back slightly, keeping my voice even. "The system activates based on pressure applied at a specific location within my property boundary. It does not interfere with anything that is not already there." The room went quiet again, not dramatic, just a pause where the words settled into place. One of the board members, an older man with reading glasses perched low on his nose, cleared his throat. "Are you saying the vehicle triggered the system?" "Yes," I said simply. "Consistently. Over multiple days. I have documentation if you would like to see it." That shifted the energy. Not dramatically, but enough. Brenda's expression tightened for just a fraction of a second before she smoothed it over. "We are not here to review your documentation," she said quickly. "We are here to address a potential violation." I tilted my head slightly, not confrontational, just precise. Then it might be important to establish whether there is one. I reached into my bag and placed a small stack of printed images on the table, each one time-stamped, each one showing the same path, the same angle, the same vehicle crossing the same section of my lawn day after day. No commentary, no labels, just facts. The soft rustle of paper filled the room as they looked, one by one, the pattern becoming harder to ignore with each image. I did not need to say anything else, because this was never about what I built. It was about what she kept doing. And for the first time since this started, that was no longer something she could control. The shift in the room was subtle, but once you felt it, you could not ignore it, like the moment a circuit closes and everything suddenly has direction. The board members were no longer looking at me. They were looking at the photos, flipping through them slower now, their fingers pausing on each image just a fraction longer than before, tracing the same diagonal line across my yard over and over again. You could almost hear the pattern clicking into place in their heads. Brenda saw it too. I watched her posture tighten, shoulders pulling back just slightly, chin lifting as she prepared to push harder, because that was what she did when control started slipping. She pressed down. These images do not change the fact that your system created an unsafe condition, she said, her voice sharper now, less polished, more force behind each word. A vehicle was affected. I leaned forward just enough to rest my forearms on the table, keeping my movements slow, deliberate. On private property, I said. Under repeated, documented use without permission. The older man with the glasses adjusted them again, clearing his throat as he looked from the photos to Brenda and then back to me. Was there any prior communication about this? He asked, not to me, but to her. That was the first crack. Brenda hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but it was there. There were general notices about maintaining community standards, she replied, carefully choosing each word. I reached into my bag again and placed another sheet on the table, a printed copy of the violation notice she had sent me, the one citing lawn maintenance issues. The date sat clearly at the top. This was issued after the pattern had already been established, I said calmly. Not before. The room went quiet again, but this time it felt different, heavier, like the air had settled into something more grounded. One of the other board members, a woman who had not spoken yet, leaned forward slightly, studying the document. So you are saying the issue began with repeated unauthorized use of your property? She asked. Yes, I replied, and continued despite attempts to address it. Brenda's hand tightened around the edge of the table, her nails pressing lightly into the surface, a small detail, but one that stood out against her otherwise controlled appearance. This is being taken out of context, she said quickly. The intent was to improve accessibility within the neighborhood. I let that sit for a moment, then asked the question that had been waiting since the beginning. Across property lines? No one answered right away. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, just unavoidable. The kind of silence that forces people to acknowledge what is already clear. The older man leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. We need to focus on whether any rules were actually violated, he said, his tone more measured now, less aligned with hers. That was the moment the balance shifted completely. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet realignment of attention. Brenda straightened again, trying to recover ground, but the rhythm had changed. She was no longer directing the conversation, she was reacting to it. I sat back, hands resting calmly on the table, feeling the steady hum of control return, not because I had forced it, but because I had let the facts do what they always do when given enough space. They settle. And once they settle, they do not move. The decision did not come with a bang or a raised voice. It came with a quiet shift in tone, the kind that only happens when a room realizes it has been leaning in the wrong direction and slowly corrects itself. The older man folded his hands on the table, looking directly at Brenda now instead of me, and spoke in a measured, deliberate way that carried more weight than anything she had said all evening. Based on what we are seeing here, there is no clear violation on Mr. Cole's part regarding the installation or operation of his irrigation system, he said, each word landing clean and final. However, there does appear to be a repeated use of private property without consent. The words settled into the space like a line being drawn, not aggressively, just firmly. Brenda opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out at first, just a slight pause, the kind that does not usually exist for someone like her. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, tighter. "This is being misinterpreted," she said, but even she seemed to hear how thin that sounded now. The woman across the table leaned back slightly, tapping one of the printed photos with her finger. "It is actually very consistent," she said, almost thoughtfully. "Same time, same path, multiple days. That is not incidental." There was no accusation in her tone, just observation, and that made it harder to argue against. I stayed quiet, letting the conversation move without me, the faint hum of the air conditioning filling the gaps between their words. This was never about overpowering anyone. It was about letting the pattern speak for itself. The older man nodded once, then looked back down at the documents. "I think the appropriate course of action is to close this matter regarding Mr. Cole," he continued, then added, almost as an afterthought, but not really, "and issue a reminder to all residents regarding property boundaries and unauthorized access." That was it. No drama, no confrontation, just a clean resolution, the kind that leaves no room for interpretation. Brenda's expression did not change much, but the energy behind it did. The certainty was gone, replaced with something sharper, quieter, like she was already calculating her next move, but this time without the same footing she had before. She gathered her papers quickly, more quickly than necessary, the soft shuffle of documents breaking the stillness as she stacked them into a neat pile that did not quite stay aligned. "This is not over," she said under her breath, not loud enough to address the room, but loud enough that I heard it clearly from where I sat. I did not respond. I did not need to, because for the first time since this started, she was the one reacting to consequences instead of creating them. I stood up slowly, the chair sliding back with a soft scrape, and nodded once to the board before heading toward the door. The evening air outside felt different, cooler, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and distant sprinklers starting up across the neighborhood. As I walked back to my house, the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long, even lines across the pavement, and when I reached my yard, I paused for just a second, looking down at the grass that now sat untouched, smooth, exactly the way it had been meant to be. No tracks, no shortcuts, just a clear boundary that no one had crossed since that morning. And the thing about boundaries is, once they are made visible, people do not ignore them the same way again. The next morning came quieter than the ones before it, the kind of quiet that does not feel empty, just settled, like everything had finally found its place. I woke up a few minutes before 6, out of habit more than anything else, and stepped outside with my coffee into that early Texas air that still held a trace of cool before the heat rolled in. The lawn stretched out in front of me, even and clean, the blades of grass catching the soft light just as the sun started to edge over the rooftops. No tracks, no ruts, no diagonal scar cutting across something I had rebuilt piece by piece. I stood there for a while, not doing anything, just listening. No engine at 6:12. No low hum creeping into the cul-de-sac like it owned the place. Just the distant sound of a sprinkler down the street and a bird somewhere up in the oak tree near the corner. That was when I knew it was done. Not because she had admitted anything, not because she had apologized, but because the pattern was gone. And when a pattern like that disappears overnight, it means something shifted at a level deeper than words. Around 6:20, a different car rolled slowly past, one of the neighbors heading out early, and for the first time, they stayed on the pavement, tires following the curve of the street exactly the way they were supposed to. No shortcuts, no assumptions, just respect for a line that had finally been made visible. Later that afternoon, I noticed something else. A small update posted on the HOA community board, nothing dramatic, just a short notice about property boundary awareness and respecting private landscaping installations. No names, no details, just a quiet correction written in neutral language. The kind of message that only shows up after something has already been decided behind closed doors. I read it once, then closed the page without a second thought. I did not need recognition. I did not need validation. The grass outside my window was enough. That evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the street in that warm, golden light that makes everything look softer than it really is, I walked the edge of the yard one more time, boots pressing lightly into the ground, feeling the firmness under each step, the system beneath it steady. Unchanged, ready if it ever needed to be. But I had a feeling it would not. Because the truth is, I never built that system to stop her. I built it to reveal her. To take something she had been doing quietly, repeatedly, and make it impossible to ignore. And once it was seen, really seen, it did the rest on its own. I paused at the corner of the lawn, looking out toward the street where her Lexus used to cut across every morning, and for a second, I could almost hear that old sound again, the crunch of tires over fresh sod, the routine that had once felt inevitable. Then it faded, replaced by something better. Silence. Not empty, not tense. Just quiet in the way a space feels when it is finally respected. I took one last sip of coffee, the bitterness settling in clean and steady, and turned back toward the house. Because in the end, I did not raise my voice, I did not block her path, and I did not break a single rule. I just made sure that when she crossed the line again, the line would answer back. And it did, exactly once, exactly when it mattered, and that was all it ever needed to do.